My name is Brooke Sprowl, and I have on the show today my dear friend Alex Federici.
Hey,
Alex
Brooke.
and I, Alex and I have known each other since we were a tender age of 18. I think
Children. Yeah.
what
Yeah.
20 years now. And Alex has been hugely instrumental in my own personal journey of kind of personal development, self awareness, learning and growing in my relationships, and my ability to kind of understand and communicate more effectively, understand boundaries and consent, as well as more recently conversations about how the personal is political and how our internalized systems of oppression in our households can map onto our political views and sort of the feedback loop between those two things. And I've had sort of a profound awakening in this regard, which I credit largely to Alex and our ongoing conversations. And I thought this would be a really important conversation to have and invite others into. So, welcome, Alex, and thank you.
That was an incredibly kind way of welcoming onto your podcast. Thank you so very much, Brooke. Yeah, I'm super happy to be here.
Yeah. So we've had this conversation. If we really trace back the roots, it's been a few years now.
Yeah.
And it really started with, conversations about how in a particular relationship I was in, ways in which my value as a woman was perceived in relationship to physical attraction and how I
Yes.
was objectifying myself and like therefore perceiving it as normal and okay to be
Yes.
objectified by others or to have my value perceived in relation to this kind of cultural standard of what is agreed on as beauty. And so that was really the beginning of some very long conversations that have evolved significantly. But just sort of curious if you wanted to share anything about that topic, because I think that has some really important, ramifications and things to explore.
It's interesting because when it came to your sense of self worth, and I feel this way too, because it's different for a hetero or hetero representing men in our society, but there's like a strain of it that's similar of what we have been told our value is based in. Um, and then we know to some large degree that there's a desire for perfect expression of that thing that is not possible, right? So like you're not going to be, I mean this in the most chauvinistic gross sense, like a 10, right? Like nobody is a 10, everybody has faults. And so then you're looking for people to validate that you are worthwhile, as opposed to recognizing yourself as being perfect in your own imperfect humanity from the get-go. And so you then subconsciously start looking for partners who will tell you things like you being perfect in not an imperfect way, but in the like, no, 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 you're this thing, or oh my God, I get attention from this person. And if this person is giving me attention, I must be worthwhile. And now you're seeking validation externally. And it's not even like, there are times in my life where I've wanted to be around people that are most certainly smarter than I am. And there is certainly a feeling of like, ooh, I'm like in a conversation with a very smart person. And there's a type of validity that's occurring in there. But there's, I think, relationship where it isn't actually about the way that the two of you are dancing. And it is about what the person is willing to give to you and what the person can take away from you. And so then you end up in relationships where the other person holds the keys to your self-worth because you perceive yourself as I'm only beautiful because this person says that I'm beautiful. They can take away that at any time. They can revoke that sense of self-worth. And whenever they mistreat me, they can give it back to me as a way to allow for the mistreatment.
Yeah, really well said. And the framing that I use to think about some of those concepts is a little different, maybe, than yours. I
Yeah.
think about my frame of kind of the spectrum of narcissism and the ways in which we appeal to things outside of us for worth as a compensation for our internal sense of unworthiness or internal traumas that we
Yes.
experience. We then compensate by seeking external validation. And that creates a transactional and consumeristic approach to relationships
Yes.
in which we
Yes.
commodify ourselves. And then, as you're saying, we're looking to others. How good, how, I had a friend who we used to talk about this a lot, and I think it's a really damaging framework, but it's the thing we're trying to dismantle. So I think it's important that we talk about it. Like, how valuable are you in the sexual marketplace? Like, where do you
Yes.
fall in that, like, as you said, kind of deliberately chauvinistic, like that framing? Like, where do I fall in that 1 to 10? Where am I on that? And then we're
Yes.
constantly looking for people and things and trying to present ourselves to raise our status, as opposed to seeing ourselves as intrinsically valuable in our unique expression, and seeing relationships, as you said, as a dance that is co-created and emergent between two people, that's less about any particular characteristics and how we live up to certain standards, and more about kind of the way you particularly connect with the given, with the way in which individuals connect and relate, and what they bring out in
Yes.
each other and what emerges in that dance. And so I've gone through a huge shift in my relationships, but it's still ongoing. I mean, I still feel like I'm dismantling a lot of these transactional, kind of consumeristic ways of viewing myself and others. And what's really beautiful, though, that we've talked about is, as we dismantle this internalized oppression and commodification, like, what opens up in terms of possibilities to connect with people is so nourishing and soulful. It's like you're no longer sort of in this constant state of judging and evaluating and
Yes. Yes.
seeing others as instrumental, or
Yes.
you're kind of just, you get into this experience of just connection and kindness, and seeing the beauty, like the beauty in the uniqueness, the beauty not in the you're a 10, but in the actual kind of genuine soulfulness of another human being. And it's quite radical how it shifts your perspective. And I'm not suggesting that I have that lens all the time, or that it's been sort of a
Well,
linear
nor do
process.
I. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or that, yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's like, I never want to present, like, when we have these glimpses of a more awakened state of consciousness, I never want to present that, like, I'm now enlightened and that's just a fixed state. And,
Well, I know, and we've expressed this before, that I think for the two of us, it comes from the opposite directions. But for me, the hole that I'm trying to fill, and the commodification of other people, the perception of other people as being in this marketplace, which whenever I see the dating or the sexual marketplace, my body like does one of these, like um, that for me, there is still a desire to prove to myself that I am worthy, and so in that way, it's like, am I a good instrument? Would somebody want to purchase me, even if that purchasing is with their time? And I can know, which I do, that I have intrinsic value that far outweighs that the intrinsic value that I have gets diminished the moment I try to put a monetary or temporal value on who I am and what I am. That I am, if we look at it from a religious perspective, like, I am a child of God, that the thing that created all things has deigned for me to exist in this moment, and that there is no amount of money that can supersede that understanding about the world. Or I am the entail of 13 billion years of astronomical, atomical, biological evolution that has led to this place, that this, like, blip of thing called Alex Federici gets to exist. And, like, any other way of viewing you diminishes the reality of the situation, because the
Mm,
reality of the situation are those two things, however you want to view it in your paradigm of the world. And to see
mm,
yourself as a thing to be bought and sold, to see yourself as,
mm,
am I good enough to be around other people? Am I a cool kid? Whatever the story is that you have, that story is so, it pales in comparison to what the reality is.
mm,
And
mm,
then when you see other people, because then the next step is like, oh, if that is true for me, that's true for everyone. That everyone I interact with is a child of God who was created and put here because they have intrinsic value. Every individual I meet here is the long tail of billions of years of striving and trying and loving and being. And this is a special moment where me and they get to share space, whatever the hell that is, for this brief period of time, whatever the hell that is. That, like, that moment has value, and that value supersedes any way in which it validates me. That, like,
mm.
this on my deathbed is going to be a moment in time that I got, and there is no amount of money or perception that is going to change that. Oh my God, me and Brooke are having this conversation right now.
Right. It reminds me of the kind of ego. ego being the hungry ghost, right? It's like
Sure.
anytime I feel that brief relief of, that ego boost that gives me this momentary fleeting sense that I'm okay, it's gone immediately. And there's a way in which it's never filled. And I think only by kind of discovering how empty the paradigm is, or
Yes.
failing at it in some way, do we actually have the invitation to die to that paradigm and to
Yes.
discover this new way of being, and the preciousness that you're speaking to, this preciousness and gift that we miss because we are taught to commodify ourselves and others, and to take such an instrumental approach to people, to time. I've been thinking a lot about what I've been calling in my own mind temporal instrumentality, like time as a means to an end, as opposed
Yes.
to like time as intrinsically worthy. And it's almost
Hmm.
analogous to what we're talking about as, us as human beings being intrinsically worthy and precious. Like when I slow down enough and when I'm present, I can find the preciousness in the still moments each day. But because I take such an instrumental and really capitalistic approach to time, I mean, it's
Yes.
all what's really interesting for me, because some of the political conversations and ideas are a lot newer for me, is how so much of our approach to ourselves, others, and time is capitalist, is like a conditioning and a
Yes.
programming that is
Yes.
capitalistic, that I didn't realize. Like I thought that this is just the way things are. I had no idea how much the culture and the political system and just kind of American cultural values are a part of the way I live my really daily life. And I think that brings us to
Yes.
some of the larger conversations that we were wanting to have around kind of systemic change, and how cultural beliefs are such a, well, I think the major breakthrough and realization that I had recently was that these political issues are not logistical issues. They are spiritual issues. They are not I have for a long time thought that you know all of this stuff, it's like it is systemic, but it's like it's logistical. That's not my strong suit. I don't
Yes.
know how to do that, so
Yes.
I can't change anything. And I felt this powerlessness and this defeatism, because from a young age I wanted to serve the world, I wanted to make a difference, and I felt like I didn't have a way to do that. And then it
Yes.
was like, wait a second, this isn't a logistical problem. That's the conditioning, that's the lie,
Yes.
that's the framing
Yes.
that's been taught to me in order to
Yes.
prevent me from changing it, so
That's
that
right.
certain people can stay in power. I see that
Yes.
now, which I didn't
Yes.
see
And so that
probably 2
and
weeks
so
ago.
that and so that the system remains in power, right? I think,
Yes.
for the most part, even when it is very clear that there are individuals who are intending to, and I mean this in the broadest sense, profit off of the system, that the system itself predates them, right? So that even those that you could even pinpoint and say like they are actively making the world the way that it is currently, that like the system has existed for so long that it's not a thing that any one or group of individuals have done. It is the world that we were born into. Um,
It was
and
inherited.
then, right, yes, it is inherited by all of us. The issue then becomes when it is a systematic issue, that we perceive it as just being an issue of a system, and that the system's not the problem. The problem are the people in the systems. And if only we could either convince the people to act differently, or we can change the way that the system works, we can somehow be where we want to be, which is what makes it feel like it's a logistics issue. But the problem is the system is the problem, and even working within the system to change the way that it works still perpetuates the system's existence. To try to make individuals relinquish power within the system only creates power vacuums that other individuals are going to come into, because those individuals are not the actual issue. The system is the issue. And so even that baseline belief, like, oh, if we just sat down together and could have rational conversations and figure out what we needed to do within the frameworks of the system, we could create Eden. And like, that's not the way that this is going to work. It actually necessitates a paradigm change. And that paradigm change is a soulful one, because it requires us to view ourselves and the world differently than the current system tells us we should see the world and ourselves. Does that resonate,
Absolutely.
bro?
Yeah, really well said. And I think that the framing that's been so helpful to me is that it's really our collective agreements that create the systems in a way. I mean,
Yes.
we're programmed to I mean, we're indoctrinated, we're acculturated to the systems that we inherit, but the collective agreements maintain the system. And so if we can change our collective agreements about humanity and what the intrinsic value of each person, and our understandings of the ways that each of us, even those in power right now, benefit from everyone profiting, from everyone
Yes.
having equal opportunity, equal, like, I don't know, I've shared this with you before, but one of my favorite quotes is Stephen Jay Gould said, uh, I'm less interested in the weight and convolutions of Einstein's mind than in the near certainty that people of equal talent and intelligence have died in cotton fields and sweatshops.
Yes.
And for me, it's so it's so tragic that there are so many talented people who, because they just happen to be born into certain circumstances, aren't able to offer their unique gifts and genius to our culture. And then not only
That's right.
did they as individuals suffer, which we care
That's right.
about, but also
That's right.
we all suffer, we all lose by depriving our culture of the richness of this kind of collective intelligence of each person maximizing their human potential. Like you and I, we've had so many gifts and privileges, and that have allowed us to, be kind of trying to pursue our dreams and actualize ourselves kind of
Yes.
individually, psychologically, and then now in service, you with your music and me with my podcasting and thought leadership and things, and really to have this unique potential. But how much better would the world be for even us and
That's
everyone
correct.
if each
That's
person
correct.
were able to express their uniqueness by having the same advantages? And I know I personally, growing up with a very serious mental illness and having overcome that, like, I know that if I were born into any other circumstances, I could be on the street. Like, I don't delude myself into believing that I'm somehow this amazing person as an individual that's just so mentally resilient. And you know this about me, we're friends. You're the one I call at
Yes.
2 a.m. when I'm upset. So it's like, I don't delude myself into believing that it's really an individual character, that has allowed me to succeed. It is having so many advantages and so much privilege to, get the mental health care I need, get the, education I need and the support that I need, have stable housing, have stable food. If any of those things, if I didn't have any of those things, I could certainly be on the street. I could certainly be houseless. I could certainly, be in any sort, in jail, in any sort of different situation. And I think a lot of people, I don't think have that perspective, or I don't know. I think a lot of people do have that perspective,
Well,
but I think,
I think people don't want to acknowledge how precarious their situation is, right? I also think, we are indoctrinated, acculturated into a belief of um, what gets flippantly said, like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? And there's a famous, very close to the end of his life, interview that Martin Luther King gave, where he is decrying that statement because you're essentially telling people that don't have boots, let alone have straps on their shoes to pull themselves up by it, essentially so that you may call them losers and say that no, you were allowed to play the game and this is your fault that you are in the position that you are in. And to allow for us to say that to people requires us to believe that we are worthy of the advantages that you and I have by birth, the privileges that you and I have by birth. And so you have generations of people and enclaves of class that have been told that they are worthy, that they were chosen. And as you've expressed before, and this kind of like meanders into another place, like you were raised desiring to be on the side of the bully. And there's a whole group of people in our culture that, through their own bullying, through the way that they were treated when they were younger and that they were acculturated, want to be on the side of the bully because it makes them feel like no one's going to knock them off of their pedestal. And the ultimate fear is, if I don't have this bully, the others are going to come do to us what we have done to them. Even if that's not the lay of the land, even if that's not actually what has ever occurred, even if you look at civil rights, gay rights, female rights in this country, over 100 years of some of those things, it is not those disadvantaged individuals coming into society, being welcomed into society, and immediately kicking down the people who have been kicking them down for generations. They're just happy to be allowed to be in society and not get killed. But there is such a fear that people want to be on the side of bullies, and those bullies will constantly tell you, watch out. If you allow for these underclass of people to come up, the first thing they will do is knock you down, and the only person standing in the way of that is me.
Yeah, and the paradigm is that like that there's always going to be a bully, so you might as well, you might as well be on that side. Otherwise, it's like kill or be killed, like eat or be eaten. Like there's this
Yeah.
idea that like that's necessary. Like we don't have to play that game. Like we don't
Well, which
like
is
we
so
don't have
in
to
some
choose.
pockets, that was not the way that I was raised. And it's so interesting to me when we have these conversations and these things, it's like, I want to better understand where you came from. Because culturally, just forget the way that my parents raised me. Culturally, like, okay, so just right now, like superheroes are a big thing. And like the superhero mindset is like, no, 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 like you're gonna get a superpower or you're gonna like build this incredible thing and then you are gonna go beat up the bullies. And it's not about like being on the side of the bully. It's not about like making sure that the bad guy that's in power, like you can be on their side. Like the ethos of the culture is no, 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 bad guys lose. Cheaters never prosper. You want to be powerful to make sure that you take care of other people and beat up the bad guys. So like there is a strain of something that exists in my mind, at least, under the prevailing culture that is not actually the things that I watched or the ethos of the things that I read when I was younger. That there is the thing that we talk about, which is like America goes and beats up Hitler, and then the thing that we don't want to talk about, which is like also while oppressing Black people.
Yeah.
But the story, I think, is the right story. And so there seems to be pockets of society that are telling different stories. Because it blows my mind when bullies rise to power and it's not very obvious what is going on. And the only reason it's obvious to me, I truly believe, because of the culture I grew up in and the stories I was told when I was younger, or else I wouldn't realize it.
Right. Yeah, what's most shocking and disturbing to me is what I think of as analogous to gaslighting, which is the bully is rising and claiming to be the one being bullied. Like both sides perceive themselves to be, the ones being bullied. Um, Even the privileged side that is actually bullying. And how do we discern those things? I mean, that was the hardest thing for me, Alex, that you've really helped me, understand and like come to a genuine kind of like self ability to myself now discern and see what I believe to be truly there, not like Alex told me and now I see it, but like
Yeah.
actually really understand the frame and understand the thing. But like I guess what I want to share with others, and I don't know if this is, if we can even codify this. It was such a long process of so many conversations, is like, how do we know? Like, how do we know that we're not the person who's actually the bully? Like, how do we know which side is which? How do we know the difference between the superheroes and the Hitlers of the world, because I think that's part of the conundrum right now. And again, by
Yeah.
design, I think it's intentional, but, you know, like it's really difficult right now in our current culture with our, all of the ways in which we're kind of siloed by social media and Google and like the content that we're receiving being curated to our biases and preferences. Like, how do we know which world is real?
This is not new. So I do think, there's a story of that the man who created the public address system went to his grave believing that um, he was the reason for Hitler's rise, and in a negative way, like he carried guilt. That were it not for me and the thing that I created, that this thing would not have been possible, right? And I think I would hope that the people who created the current technologies have some sort of concern for what they've done, but I'm pretty sure they haven't. They don't. But that these things are going to occur regardless. I'm not certain that it's that the media is the message in this instance. I think it is about how the message gets, that what we allow the messages to be, and conversations about what sorts of speech are acceptable, which now becomes a more thorny conversation that you and I have been trying to have for some time.
I think it is helpful to take and say, wait, this is universal. This isn't contextual. I mean, I do
Yes.
think that there's a way in which these things are being amplified and accelerated by, our current technology. But, there's a way in which, like you say, it's sort of universal and, transtemporal. So like for me, my framing always comes back to the individual and like the individual analogy, because that's my expertise is,
Sure.
individuals, relationships, etc. So it's helpful for me to like contextualize it or use metaphors that are related to individual and relational dynamics. And like when I think about children being bullied, it's extremely traumatic if you teach a child not to stand up to a bully. Like they
Yes.
carry the shame. I mean, I work with people who've been bullied, and it's like it doesn't, like, the imprint is so deep. Part of my struggle and, individually when I've been in relationships that have abusive elements or bully elements is almost always engage with the bully as though they are um operating in good faith, and then
That's
I'm like
correct.
very confused by
Yeah,
why
you sure
my
do. I remember this. Yes. Yes.
why
Yeah.
my good faith, like,
Yes.
communication, like I'm using all my communication skills, I'm doing all
Yes.
the right things, and yet somehow the conversations aren't resulting in the way that they would with any good faith person, like. And so I would be very confused by that, and I guess I'm just kind of trying to map that on to this political dialogue. I think that that's a lot of what is happening too, is like we have, and I think a lot of people are savvy to this and they aren't engaged in it in this way. But for me, it was like this feeling that, oh, well, there's two good faith, parties. There's two good faith, and
Right.
not that there
And you mean that
aren't.
not in a political sense. I want to be very clear.
Yeah.
You don't mean the parties as in like the two American political parties. You mean two
Yeah.
individuals or two groups having conversation. Yeah. But this
Right.
transcends a political binary. Yeah.
Right. And each of these parties is, operating in good faith, but it's like no, a lot of people are not. Both individuals
No.
and, political groups are not operating in good faith. So you can't have a fair fight, and you're never going to win a fight if you're playing by the rules and someone else isn't. And so
That's right.
that's a big part of what I see, in terms of my individual experience where I am, where I have more expertise, awareness, experience, understanding, and I can see the complexity in it. But then it's like when I try to map that on to, the larger conversation, I'm starting to see the same principles apply collectively.
Well, I am curious then, I think, to move from the depressing element of it. How do you, no, sincerely, how, how do you think is the best way to begin the dismantling of the negative aspects of that upbringing while maintaining community, family, friendship, and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater? But like, how do we get into those subgroups in our culture to plant seeds to change the way that people think from
Hmm.
inception?
Yeah, what a great question. For me, my individual journey was very much, around, there was a lot of what I call transformative destruction, right? So there was a lot I had to tear down. There was a lot of kind of death and rebirth, that many deaths and rebirths that had to happen. And part of that was a loss and a grief of that original community, and a lot of reprogramming and healing and deep internal work in terms of my own psychotherapy and um, self-awareness, and so much that needed to happen before I could actually, reconnect with friends and find people that I was connecting with from a deeper way. I mean, I had very deep, close relationships in the church, but I didn't realize that there was a way in which my true values weren't reflected in those relationships. And it
Mm,
wasn't until I did a lot of internal work and healing that, you and I reconnected several years ago, and some older friendships kind of resurfaced as I kind of emerged from the old paradigm and kind of continually grew and left old relationships behind that weren't really in alignment with my values. And then and then I started to create new friends with, like, within a new set of values and a new paradigm. But it took a lot of letting go, and it did take some being alone and some grieving. I mean, it took a lot of pain. But I think that finding, groups that share your values, I mean, you have to know what your values are. And that's part of
yeah.
the transition time is like to go back to a biblical metaphor, um, what's the analogy I heard one time? It was like, the opposite of slavery isn't freedom. The opposite of slavery is the desert. Like, you don't you don't exit oppression and just go straight to freedom. You actually go
Yeah.
through a period in which there's kind of a destitute land that you're wandering, and you don't know if you're going to get to freedom. You got out of the oppression, but you're not actually clear if you're going to get to the promised land. And
Yes.
so, I think that really was my experience. Was there was a part of it that was freeing and liberating and healing. And then there was a part of it that was, I really miss that. I've got no bedrock anymore. There was something familiar.
Yes.
There's a bit of a Stockholm syndrome in that.
Yes.
And then over time, as you kind of go through the desert, you gradually start to really find out who you are, I think. And then on that journey, you meet others kind of who are on the same path. And I think that's where you start to rebuild a more authentic and enduring community based on your actual values. But man, it's not an easy road. It's not like a super straightforward process. I think it's very iterative. I think it's very kind of long suffering. I think it's there's a lot of very deep work involved in that process. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think, uh, and then I think there's a way in which the necessity is to, as in ways, being former wanderers, make sure that you create community on the other side for people to come into, right? Because we can start to just murder this metaphor. We could start planting villages on the outskirts of that desert that begin to encroach on the desert, so that in each existing generation, that the journey is actually shorter and shorter, and that there are established places and people for you to come into that will grab you and take you in, right? That in a way, this is like a cultural refugee program, right? And the it requires, and this gets back to the way our culture is like, once you get free, there's a feeling of you're just kind of out for yourself, like I'm finally free and now I just get to go. And it's like, no, but also perhaps we create a community on this side of the spectrum that allows for people to come into our arms afterwards. And that requires us to accept that we have accessed an acceptable amount of freedom for ourselves. Like, I don't need to keep running. I'm already here. I can make camp here, and I can be a place for people to come and be given love.
That's sounds like a really wonderful place to wrap. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Alex. I love
Thank you for
you.
having me, Brooke. I love you
Thank you
so
for
much.
your time.